Hola amigos, buenos días, bienvenidos a un nuevo episodio de CoreDevX LabsTV, el programa de YouTube donde exploramos las tendencias actuales de tecnología e innovación. ¿Cómo estás, Felipe? Buenos días.
Hola amigos, ¿qué tal? Bienvenidos. Así es, un día más desde acá del frío sur. Estamos remoto hoy día, Andrés está en Santiago, yo estoy acá en Pucón. Felices de contarles un par de noticias que tenemos. El día de hoy tenemos una entrevista que grabamos con un amigo nuestro, que es Johan Bergström. Muy interesante su experiencia, todo lo que él ha realizado. Es un sueco viviendo en Chile, ya lleva un par de años viviendo acá. Así que tiene una experiencia y una historia muy interesante que contarles, por eso que quisimos también entrevistarlo. Y además contarles que tenemos un par de sorpresas que se las vamos a ir avanzando, se las vamos a ir contando avanzando el programa. Así que yo estoy muy bien, Andrés, ¿tú cómo estás? Veo que ya te llegó la primavera por allá,
Claro,
haciendo de lo suyo.
un poco congestionado por estar acá en la ciudad, en la capital, pero feliz de poder compartir acá con los compañeros en CoreDevX, con toda la familia, esta maravillosa familia. Como decía Felipe, muchas sorpresas. Esta semana me tocó dar una clase en la Universidad de los Andes, tuve que ir con nuestro colega Ignacio, fuimos a la feria de País Digital también, que fue en el Hotel W. Entonces, muchas sorpresas. Pero les queremos mostrar ahora, queremos pasar la entrevista que le hicimos a Johan esta semana. Y luego, al final de la entrevista, les vamos a contar qué es lo que se viene la próxima semana, porque tenemos muchas actividades en CoreDevX, en los equipos se van a separar, vamos a hacer un viaje, así que va a estar súper entretenido. Así que, sin más preámbulos, Felipe, te invito a que veamos la entrevista de Johan.
Por favor.
Vamos, un saludo, nos vamos a conectar.
Today we journey through the intersection of tech and entrepreneurship with a serial entrepreneur, open source enthusiast, and tech wizard, straight from the heart of Sweden, my friend, our friend, Johan Bergström. Hello.
Hi, good to be here. Finally.
Finally, right? Well, Felipe is in Pucón, and we are here in Santiago in our office in CoreDevX. Today, our main topic is how you took technology and make it a business. And your life, it's been making and creating companies through technology. You've been traveling around the world, living in different places, and today you're here in Chile.
Right.
So welcome to the show. We wanted to know about a little bit about your background and when did you start coding?
Great question. So I grew up in a small town in the north of Sweden. There wasn't too much to do. It was dark all the time and cold, of course. But that's probably not what led me to programming. I was fortunate enough to have a computer very early in life. It was a 386 SX 25 processor from Intel. And with that, I also got a modem where I connected to different bulletin board systems. So bulletin board systems was like an early way of like connecting with other people through like your phone line. And like at some point, you know, when you start using a thing a lot, you start thinking about how it works. And then you start thinking about how can I change the way it works because I want it to be closer to what I prefer. And then I think at the end of that stage, you start saying, hey, I want to do something similar myself. And I think in the computer world, that really converges into writing your own software. So at that time, you know, I started writing BASIC, which was like a language from Microsoft. But then you start traveling through the different languages because BASIC is very limited. So I started writing Pascal, and then it moved a little bit into C, and on it goes. So I think that at the beginning of the journey was really that curiosity, but converting into the opportunity of being able to create whatever you want.
Perfect.
And then as I moved a bit south in Sweden for studying at university, I also was at that same crossroads that like university was all brand new, so nothing worked, and the fiber connecting to our like student homes didn't work. So I was like, hey, if no one else is fixing this, I'm gonna do it. So you start figuring these things out, and I think that curiosity to think about, to understand how things work, but then also, you know, being able to affect how they work is really what's been driving me. And as I went through university, I started building, like I started my first company at the age 19.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that time where you had your Nokia phones, you were able to send MMS messages, like pictures to each other over phones. And I had this idea where, you know, usually in Sweden, when you travel abroad for Christmas or something, you would send your postcards home. But instead of sending postcards, because it took many weeks to get them in the mail, I had this idea of what if I print them in Sweden and I take the picture in Thailand, and then it automatically sends it to the printer, and it prints the postcard, writes a message, and then it sends it through the post mail in Sweden. So I started building this system, and of course it didn't grow like into a big business because these things are hard and to scale, but it was incredibly satisfying and scary at the same time, because, you know, you had to learn about like how do you create a company and how do you do things like tax, which I still don't know. But it's still like all these extra things that sometimes can become scary. But I think like always having your focus on like what is the product and that usually brings other people closer to you. That brings like, you know, oh, but I have a friend that has a mom that she does taxes. Okay, cool, she can help. So like just staying kind of on focus with your passion usually attracts others.
Perfect.
So that's really how I got into programming.
Johan, it's a pleasure you've been here. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Johan, can you share a fun or interesting story from your first project as a developer? Any lesson learned that skill makes you smile now?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was not necessarily the absolute first project, but it would have this moment that I still smile when I think about. And that was after university. I created like my first kind of big company, which at that point actually became like one of, I would say, greatest successes, like my greatest exit as a startup, which was a blogging platform in Sweden. What I did was like I had to write Python. I had to learn how to, you know, scale servers because you didn't have clouds back then, right? So I had to connect all my servers together. I had to maintain the Linux distributions. I had to do the logo. I had to do the design. You do everything, right? Mm-hmm. So like you have all of these things coming together. And then I remember my first client, like was a 15-year-old girl, a blogger. And she's like, why can I only upload 10 pictures? Like, and I said, no, but that's because like storage is expensive and I have to pay for it. So if you pay me like €1 a month, then I can give you more storage. And she's like, of course. And like just getting that money, like there's something magical about like someone else paying you for something you do out of passion, something you like. I believe so much in this tool. I believe so much in what other people can do with this tool. And then like getting that validation, like today, it's still one of the most like magical moments as an entrepreneur. Just that first paying customer.
Okay, incredible. And how long did you have this company for?
So I created it around 2004. I sold it in 2007, and I had to stay like as part of the company to around 2009.
This blog is still online?
It's
still online?
I think, but I don't really like check a lot. At its peak, it was huge. I had around 4 million unique visitors a week.
Oh wow!
And you know, I would have like 150,000 new blogs per day. Mm-hmm. So it was really like a super active community, and people were just talking so much about what they were doing. So it was like before Instagram, before all these social services that like, you know, then took over. But I think the key differences of having a blog versus having an Instagram account is that with a blog, you own your own content, right?
Exactly.
You don't upload to a platform and then the platform changes their terms of service so one day to the other, and you don't own your stuff. Mm-hmm. For instance, in Facebook, if you upload things to Instagram, they specifically write that you will not own this content any longer. It's ours to own. Uh-huh. And like having your own blog or having your own platform, the way you have your podcasting platform, is an empowerment, because you can take this content and you can go anywhere else and you will still have your following.
Yeah.
That's where I still encourage people like to like build your own platform.
Yeah.
Like build something that you own and that you control.
Exactly. Perfect. Well, many viewers are intrigued by your involvement in JavaScript because you talk about languages. We didn't ask you how many languages do you speak to the computer, but must be many. But you are a contributor to Node.js.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit of that story?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was another startup around 2008 I did in parallel to the other one. And it was like a Twitter clone in Swedish. And what we wanted to do was that we wanted to do this live view where things just start popping in on the screen. And like, you know, when you do a site, you usually try to do reusable templates, right? So you do like a picture block and you use that 10 times to show 10 pictures. And we wrote that in HTML and in JavaScript, and you know, it looked great. But then as we were pushing this from the server, we wanted to do it live, we also had to render the same thing from the server. And we were like, hey, why is this so complicated to do in Python? Like, because it was so easy to do in JavaScript and HTML. And I mean, Python is a great language. It's not necessarily about bashing Python here, but we had like a template engine and it didn't work. So we started looking around, and what I saw was that a project from Mozilla, the organization behind Firefox, behind many other like very important things in open source, they wrote this JavaScript engine that was empowering Firefox called SpiderMonkey. And this was like freestanding. So you could actually take it and you could compile it as like a library you can embed into Python. And we were like, hey, this is super cool because now we can run the same JavaScript on the server and on the client. And you know, now like 15 years later, everyone knows that this is how it works. This is how you do it. Like you will have your React framework that would be rendered as on the server and it would be rendered at the client and the result would be the same. But back then, you know, that was a big deal. And so like, as I saw that, I also started to like explore like what's happening out there. And there was this guy, his name is Ryan Dahl. And he was like the creator of Node.js, and he started writing it, and like people started coming, like it started going fast. And the way Node.js works is very similar to what we actually tried to achieve in Python. So it is like a runtime written in C++, and then it embeds the JavaScript engine from Chrome called V8. And then what it does is it gives you like a certain set of functions, for instance, reading files from the file system that you can't do in a browser, and so on and so forth. And then it exposes it as like this one library or language that you can use to do whatever you want. And at that time, I found this incredibly interesting and like something that I was like, hey, I need to be part of this. So it happens like every other thing that I've been mentioning up to this point. Like it starts with curiosity, but then there's this one thing that doesn't work. Let's say there's a bug. Let's say like I like to play around. So I was running different operating systems like FreeBSD or OpenBSD or Solaris at the time, and it didn't work there. Like I couldn't run Node there, and I'm like, why can't I run Node here? You can run Chrome. So I started looking into that, and like, I started writing patches to help fix that, and like there we go. And ultimately, things started working pretty well on the other operating systems. And then I found other areas that I was super interested in, and that's kind of how I became a contributor. You just work with something that kind of intersects your day to day most often. And then you just start finding these bugs or these improvements that will help you. And for me, like the barrier from seeing like that to doing it has always been almost zero. Like if you find a typo in a documentation, just fix it. Like get it done. Don't like wait for someone else to do it when you can do it yourself. Right?
Perfect.
Wow, so much knowledge.
I've forgotten everything.
Johan, well, it's evident you are passionate about open source.
Yeah.
Many viewers might wonder, is it possible to make a living out of it? And what fuels the drive to contribute and engage so deeply?
Yeah, that's so interesting because it's been changing so much the last few years. Because let's say 15 years ago or 20 years ago, the only way you would make money from being in open source was working at like Red Hat, a company that would distribute Linux, and you would work on Linux, the operating system, or you would work on certain libraries. So you would be employed by these big companies and you could work on it. But what's been happening more and more is that the business model of modern companies, let's say Supabase, which is like a modern way for you to quickly get up and running with creating data and creating websites, their entire product is fully open source. or let's say Next.js, which is a very popular runtime for Node.js and a way to develop Node.js applications. Same there. Their entire stack, except a few small things, I should say, but like mostly they work in the open. So you can either be like hired by these companies and work on open source all day and all night as much as you want, or you can do what many other people are starting to do now. Like, for instance, you could have YouTube channels that talks about different types of coding. You could have Twitch channels. There are many Twitch channels today that all they do is open their editor and sit there and write a game, and people start coming and asking them questions, and they go there following because they probably are good at explaining how they're thinking, or educational, or just enjoyable. But there's so many ways nowadays, and I found that super amazing. For instance, there's a new company that launched their 1.0 product 3 weeks ago called Bun. So Bun is kind of this competitor to Node.js. It's very similar. It's like a runtime that allows you to run TypeScript and JavaScript. But the creator has been working with this in the open for about 2 years. And then 6 months ago, he reported that he had such a big following on GitHub and on Twitter because he was talking about performance very openly, and so there were so many people interested in what he was doing that he raised a lot of money to continue working on the product. So he's hired a team and it's growing, and they still work in the open. People always ask me, how do you get started with these things? How do you get engaged? And I think the best answer is, if you find something, if you find an itch or a quirk that doesn't work the way you expect it to, just fix it. It could be a missing exclamation mark in the documentation. It could be something wrong on the website. It doesn't have to be the language itself. It can be the simplest things. And another good thing that's happening is that a lot of these bigger libraries or bigger projects on GitHub, they usually have a label called new, good for beginners. And the more seasoned developers usually leave it intentionally there for other people to come and to be able to contribute. And this is usually how most people get hired. They start engaging to an open source project, and then companies that uses this open source project a lot, could be like a translation library, could be Next.js. They will say, hey, who should we hire for working more on this project? Well, of course, this guy. So it's a really nice, it's not just, a passion project, but it's also like a career builder nowadays.
Very good, very good. The world of technology and entrepreneurship is ever evolving. Can you mention a current technological trend that excites you, and how do you think this might impact entrepreneurship? And also, what's your vision for the next big intersection between these two, entrepreneurship and technology?
I want to touch on 3 things, actually. The first thing that had a huge, fundamental impact, I would say, is being able to work remotely. Because before the pandemic, this was kind of like an outlier, right? It was not very common that companies allowed their developers or their people to work remote. But with the pandemic, for us loners that always kind of had this opportunity of working remote, that became accepted. And, people didn't stop working just because they worked from home. They probably worked even more because they didn't have to commute, or they were more comfortable, or they felt like they weren't disturbed as much. So I think remote had a huge and fundamental impact, especially to people in the technology sector, because, back in the day when I used to live in Australia, I used to travel to Bali, to Vietnam, to Japan, and I just need to open my laptop and I'm working. You put your headphones on or whatever that makes you focus, and off you go. That's what you can do. So I think that's a huge, really big door opener to people feeling more comfortable in working in the technology sector. The second thing, which what is a hype right now? I mean, I have to mention it. It's AI. I'm not on fire for AI, but it is a disruptive technology that is fundamentally changing many things in their core. And I have to say also that a lot of startups nowadays, one-man bands, this one guy that says, perhaps people want to ask questions this specific way. They take AI, they connect it to a data set that is good at answering those questions. And 3 months later, they're reporting $100,000 profits a month on Twitter. So there's so many startups in this space that that they follow this simple model that I also believe in, which is find one problem that people have and make it slightly simple. Just if there's 10 steps to making coffee, can you make it 9? I've always believed in that. most of my companies come from that same premise, which is like find a problem and make it just a little bit simpler. It doesn't have to be this much simpler, just a little bit, and people will come. And then you can find the reason that why should people stay as well, right? So you can keep working on your product. But I think that's the thing. And the third, what really excites me, I thought it would be last year, but I would say it's more this year and even more so next year. The timing of DX. So you have UX, the user experience. DX is the developer experience. And that's something I'm actually very deeply passionate about.
Sorry, DX?
DX.
Yes.
Like instead of UX,
Perfect.
User experience, this is developer experience.
Exactly. So like all the open source projects today, let's say Astro, which is a static site generator, they invest heavily in DX. How easy it is to get started? How are the guides? They're interactive. There's funny emojis everywhere. There's user-friendly design. So like focusing on the developer experience, no, they know that by doing that, more developers will use this software. And Bun is another great example, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Like Node, for instance, could have a traceback when you have an error for a JSX template, which is when you use React, that's the way you write your HTML components. In Node, when you have that problem, you will get like a big blob of the JavaScript object. But in Bun, instead you get a nicely formatted error object. So like it's a perfect example of like a mindset where the developer of the tools are like deeply thinking about the developer experience. Like how can I make this easier for someone else to use?
Perfect.
And I think that's like a revolution that I really believe in. And you know, so seeing how I'm a developer, it's very close to my heart.
I love it when you said, we start to work when we open our laptops. That's what we are doing.
So it is.
And the other is like, make it slightly simpler. The step is 10 and you make it 9, you're going in a very good direction.
Yeah.
Right?
The coolest thing about the internet is that, you know, there's like 0 barriers. I mean, China is a bit challenging, but outside of there are like almost 0 barriers to adoption. So, you know, you can be a Swedish guy building a service for Chile.
Yeah.
You can be a Chilean girl writing the next biggest startup in South Africa. Like, there's nothing like stopping you other than like how you execute.
Exactly. Do you have any words of wisdom or perhaps a piece of advice that you want to share?
Yeah. I think, you know, it's hard when you're an entrepreneur to deal with failure. I think in life, it's hard to deal with failure. Like from when we're very young, we're setting ourselves up like higher and higher. So we're more afraid of falling, you know? So I think the first thing to do is like accept that things are never going to be perfect. And that applies to your code, how you write your code, the amount of tests you do, the amount of people you're putting in front of. Like there's no such thing as perfect. So accept that good enough is good enough. And don't be afraid of what that means, because that means that ship early. Don't sit with your website for 3 weeks. Like release it at day 3 and make it better day 4. Get your first comment about how it looks on day 5 and improve it at day 6. And at day 30, it will be 10 times better than it would have been if you were sitting on it for 30 days. So I think like, you know, in sales, you always talk about always be closing. So in developer like speak, you talk about always be shipping, right? Ship your code and like don't be afraid of not perfect. And that brings me, I think, to my second like wisdom or like thing I've learned that really impacted me, which is you really need to have empathy for your client, for your user. Your user is not a developer most often. Your user is not a technologist. Like most often when people create things, they do it for themselves. And then they project that whatever like you will think about this is similar to what clients do. Often it's not the case. There are really good tools out there that helps you kind of measure how people are looking at the screen while they are clicking around. But the best feedback is always like look at your clients and like email them and ask you, can I have a video session with you where you just show the screen perhaps and show me how you use it, and you will learn so much. So like really try to empathize. And with empathy, I mean that like, don't assume that the client is stupid just because they cannot find the settings button for how to change the font from 1.5 margin to 2. Like that's not the client's fault. That's likely because you designed it in a way that made it hard for them. So like really like empathize with them, and you will learn a lot, and it will become much better. And then I guess the third thing is that don't be afraid of charging for your product. And I think that applies to many business models, but in software, you know, especially in open source, it's like, but there's so many alternatives to my product. So like, why should they choose mine? And then what happens is that they have a very generous free model where they have something that doesn't make sense from a scalability point of view. Because, you know, at the end of the day, you have to eat. And you have to have enough money to not think about getting money. So like a good way to think about your time is that it's valuable, and try to find a way where the client pays you for that. So think about what is the value in what I create, and how does that help this client? Could be time, saving time, right? There are 10 steps to 9. Could be adding value, you know? I can add filters to my phone, to my pictures. So there could be many ways, but try to think about that, and think about how much people are willing to pay you to achieve that.
So focus on your client and don't be afraid to launch your product.
That's it.
And charge for it.
And don't be afraid of charging for your product.
Yeah, and charge for your product. Well, Johan, I think we're done. Johan, it's been an absolutely pleasure. Your journey is a testament for the magic that happens when tech meets passion. Thanks for sharing your insights with us today. Absolutely, you have many experience to share, but we have in this short interview, we want to share with the viewers your experience, your knowledge,
the passion.
Yes.
His passion.
Feel free to reach out. It's been a pleasure. You can find me on GitHub. J Bergström.
We will leave in our description his GitHub, where you can reach out and see what Johan does, because
this guy is super active in GitHub.
We wanted to thank you. Well, Johan is a very good friend of Felipe and I. We've been friends for many, many years. And we wanted to bring you on the show. We're learning with Felipe. We're learning with our community, with CoreDevX. And we're always trying to bring people to technology and encourage young people, older people. It doesn't matter your age. If you're passionate about technology, well, you know, it's the time to start, and don't be afraid of it.
Exactly.
So, Johan, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Felipe, for being also with us today. Friends, see you very soon. See you next week.
Hello. Felipe, ¿estás ahí? A ver, eso.
Ahí sí.
Muy bien. Oye, buenísima la entrevista, Johan. ¿Ah?
Me estaba recordando que todo el conocimiento que tiene, su experiencia, que increíble, que alguien te cuente todo lo que ha hecho. Siendo alguien técnico, él maneja todo lo que son los aspectos técnicos de desarrollo y su experiencia como emprendedor y como persona también, porque te da la percepción de cómo podrías hacer mejor las cosas en base a su experiencia.
Exactamente.
Muy, muy interesante la entrevista, muy, muy simpático Johan también, le enviamos un saludo.
Un gran saludo, que justo estaba en reunión, no podía ver su entrevista, pero más tarde la va a ver. Y para todos los amigos que no pudieron conectarse live con nosotros, lo que queríamos hacer es dejarle esta entrevista, porque para nosotros es muy importante poder conectar y traer la experiencia de Johan, de alguien que comenzó tan joven a programar, y que encontró ese nicho que decía, cuando hay algo que tú puedes reparar, hazlo, no te quedes sentado, si tú puedes hacerlo, hazlo, porque la gente se va a dar cuenta que tú estás trabajando en eso. Y lo importante era que queríamos mostrarle lo que es trabajar en open source, que es código abierto, que tú puedes colaborar, tal como lo hizo él, en una de las más grandes librerías, que es lo que es Node.js. Él trabaja en esa librería desde el 2010. Entonces, es muy interesante lo que ha hecho y todo lo que ha aprendido. Para nosotros es un mentor, porque yo le pregunto casi todo, y creemos que para nosotros es una gran oportunidad y estamos muy felices de que él haya podido venir a la oficina, a conocernos, a conocer el computador cuántico que está por allí. Así que estamos súper felices. Bueno, yo les quiero mostrar lo que vamos a hacer esta semana, para que los amigos tengan un poco de... que sepan lo que vamos a hacer. Vamos.
Contexto, danos contexto.
Claro.
¿Qué se viene?
Entonces, hay dos ferias súper importantes en las cuales CoreDevX es sponsor y donde vamos a dar unas charlas. La primera es el Mining Summit 2023. Se lo voy a mostrar acá. Aquí está el Mining Summit. Y es esto es el evento de minería más grande de Latinoamérica. Es el 11 y el 12 de octubre en Antofagasta. Faltan 3 días. Y acá en este...
Es
primera
vez que se hace en Antofagasta.
Siempre se ha hecho en Santiago. Y ahora se hace en Antofagasta. Y como pueden ver, empresas que están en este evento, aparecemos nosotros justo allí. Así que nuestros amigos se va Ignacio junto con Javiera, junto con José María, van a ir a representarnos.
Carolina también está allá.
Carolina, para representar a CoreDevX en la fecha en la parte de minería, en el mine, y que va a estar súper interesante. Eso es el 11 y 12 de octubre en Antofagasta. ¿Y nosotros dónde nos vamos?
Sí. Bueno, hay cosas relacionadas con tecnología, bastante tecnología. Se habla de innovación, se habla de tecnología, las nuevas herramientas que se van a utilizar. Así que vamos a aprovechar de estar ahí también para compartir conocimientos y ver cuáles son las tendencias que van a estar latentes en esta industria. Luego, en la misma fecha, 10, 11 y 12 de octubre, se viene esta otra conferencia, que es la conferencia de computación cuántica más grande de Latinoamérica. Se llama Quantum Latino. Acá va a estar bien interesante porque está relacionado todo el mundo académico, la parte de investigadores, el mundo de los negocios, las empresas que dan servicios de computación cuántica, la industria, y se espera crear un ecosistema latinoamericano robusto. Así que vamos a ser parte acá, nosotros somos sponsor, también tenemos nuestro speaker, Javier Mancilla, aprovechamos de enviarle un saludo también, que van a estar todos ahí. Vamos a participar de un panel de startups también, en el cual voy a estar yo en ese panel. Así que en esos días se vienen bastantes cosas que vamos a estar tratando de cubrirlas al 100% para poder compartirlas, tanto ya sea en Antofagasta y en la conferencia que se va a llevar a cabo en Lima. Todos estos links de lo que les estamos contando de las conferencias se los vamos a dejar para que investiguen un poquito más quiénes son las empresas, de qué se va a hablar. Todavía no se masifican mucho estos contenidos, pero acá estamos para llevarlos a los amigos para que estén al tanto de esto. Estas son las empresas relacionadas, los organizadores, y ahí estamos nosotros como sponsor.
Exactamente. Así que ha sido varios días de mucha organización. Estuvimos toda esta semana ya organizando, los chicos están acá en la oficina organizando sus presentaciones, y Felipe y yo ya estamos también, bueno, todos estamos preparando las maletas para partir la próxima semana a estos dos eventos, uno en Antofagasta en el Mining Summit y el otro en Lima, Perú, en la feria de Quantum Computing de Latinoamérica que se llama Quantum Latino. Así que bueno, con esas sorpresas y con esas noticias les queríamos saludar y dejarles un gran abrazo. De todas maneras, la próxima semana vamos a estar transmitiendo, ya lo saben, desde Lima, que era la sorpresa que teníamos. Y vamos a estar siempre, como lo hacemos en CoreDevX, compartiendo conocimiento y invitando a las personas de todas las edades a que nos sigan, a que sean parte de nuestra comunidad, porque lo que más nos interesa a nosotros es que todos aprendan y que todos aprendamos de estas nuevas tecnologías disruptivas, de lo que es Deep Tech, las tecnologías profundas. Así que, bueno, sin más que eso, me quiero despedir. Felipe, que tengas un muy buen viaje. Tú ya te vienes pronto a Santiago y luego partes a Perú. Y le queremos dejar también un abrazo a todo el equipo de CoreDevX que se queda acá en Santiago y a todos el equipo también que se va a Antofagasta. Así que muchas gracias amigos a los que estuvieron presentes en este live y también a todos los amigos que van a ver la entrevista de Johan en diferido. Recuerden, También Johan nos pidió que si querían seguirlo y amigos desarrolladores que quieran ver su GitHub, está puesto en la descripción y también su página en LinkedIn. Así que muchas gracias, Felipe, que estés muy bien. Nos vemos pronto, en un par de días. Y amigos, nos vemos la próxima semana aquí en CoreDevX LabsTV.
Así es. Muchas gracias, amigos, por la sintonía. Nos vemos la próxima semana con más noticias y nuevas herramientas. Un abrazo, Andrés. Nos vemos ya en Lima la próxima semana.
Nos vemos en Lima. Chao, chao. Saludos.
Chao, chao.